Good morning. Hello. All right, I see some bright, shiny faces in the audience today that I haven't seen in a little while. Welcome back, those of you who have been MIA for a little bit. All right, let's get rolling for today. So I love it when there's lots of chatting and socializing going on, but we have a limited time, so we're going to dive right in. How's that sound? Good. All right, my name is Nikki Buckaloo. I see a few new faces in the room, so by show of hands, who is new today to the Truth Series? Raise your hand. Yay, thank you guys for coming. Give them a hand. Awesome. So just so you guys know, for context, we've been doing this about 9 years. And some of these folks have been coming for 9 years, just so you know. How many of you in the room have been coming since the very beginning? Raise your hand. Yeah, look around, give them a hand, right? Okay, so we must be doing something right. I'll be moderating the panel today, and we'll be talking about navigating end-of-life matters. I've been a little under the weather lately. Has anybody else been dealing with the sinus crud this year? Yeah, and so when I don't feel great, I tend to watch TV, and I have binge watched all the Bridgerton that's available. I'm waiting on the next 4. They should be out any day, but until then, I had to find some things to watch. Today. Oh, great. Okay, so this weekend I can binge watch Bridgerton. But this week I watched a couple of things that were very interesting, especially in light of today's topic. So one was the Titanic. Has anybody watched Titanic, the movie? Yep. I think I've watched it 50 or 60 times since 1997 when it came out. It's a love story. Who doesn't love a love story, right? But I thought it was interesting as I was watching the Titanic. That darn ship sinks every time. I know, I came in and Chris said, did the ship sink again? I said, yes, every time. No matter how many times I warn them about the iceberg, the ship sinks. 2,224 souls on board. 2 hours and 40 minutes it took for the ship to sink. 1,496 people perished. When they got on that ship, they didn't think about planning for that, did they? Because it was what? It was an unsinkable ship. It was unsinkable. People got on there and they thought, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we have enough lifeboats, which they didn't. It doesn't matter if we've planned ahead, because they didn't, because we're going to make it to America and we're going to be fine. 1,496 people did not. And it's interesting to me how at the end, you know, when they show people kind of the chaos and the panic and the people, you know, of course this is a dramatized version, I get that, right? But the panic and the chaos and the pandemonium going on the decks, right, and underneath, and the third class folks not being able to get up to the decks because first class people got priority and so on. And I laugh because the string quartet continued to play, right, until the very end. It's one of the things that the people who survived said happened, you know, and I'm thinking, gosh, what would I do if I knew this was inevitable and it was going to happen? What would I do? Would I be the string quartet that was still playing towards the end? Would I be the person, well, I couldn't be this person, but the guy, obviously, that had the wealth, you know, he had this big pocket of money, and he thought he could buy his way on to one of the life rafts, right? I don't know how many people you know, but I know a lot of people who have a lot of money, and they think they can buy anything, but you can't buy your way out of what? Death. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It's not something you can buy your way out of. There was a mother and her 2 children in third class that, I think of like hospice, right? Like she was like consoling them, like it's gonna be okay. It'll all be over soon and it's gonna be okay. And they're laying there in their bed and I'm thinking, the ship is going down, lady, down. But what else do you do when you know that there's no lifeboat for you and the ship's going down? What do you do? And I thought it was interesting. There was one of the crewmen who was trying to help people onto the life rafts who was, he kept looking around like, oh my God, how is this happening, right? How is this happening? And he was trying to help people, but it was getting out of control, and he ended up putting a gun to his own head and ending it. Wow. I thought, oh my gosh, all the different reactions to this imminent moment in time, 2 hours and 40 minutes they had to make decisions. And yet we have what we think is all the time in the world. I watched another show, a little less morbid than the Titanic, called, it's a documentary, and I would recommend this to anyone that has Netflix. It's called Is Genesis History? Has anybody else watched it? Is Genesis History? And it's really interesting. I don't know why. It's just a God thing, I guess. I just picked it out of a lineup of documentaries. And basically, it's this guy who's going around, he's interviewing all these different ologists, right? Paleontologists and geologists, and you name it, all the ologists. And basically trying to determine, is the flood story in Genesis, the story of creation and the flood story, true, and is it historic fact, or is it made up? Or is evolution, the theory of evolution, how we became who we are and what we are? And he's basically comparing and contrasting these things in the world, and all of these ologists are basically saying, look, the flood account, by all intentions, happened. It happened. And it didn't happen as long ago as they say that the earth began to form. I know we have geologists in the room. I know Herb is, yeah. And so these guys that are studying this, they've said that they are actually the carbon dating of fossils and rock formations is actually being having to be rethought, because they think that they have been miscalculating how old the earth is. And anyway, he goes on to talk about this and so on, but how is that relative, to what we're talking about today? I said, all these animals that they showcased, right? All these animals that have lived for however many millions of years we've been here. Of all the species, of all the living creatures, we are the only ones who leave behind stuff to deal with after we're gone. Think about it. When your dog dies, nobody has to probate his bed. Nobody. Right? We are it. We are the only species, the only living creature that has to go to court, potentially, after someone dies. Or fight with other people over stuff. Or even have stuff to fight over. I thought, how is that? That is so interesting to me. But yet, here we are. That's what gives me job security. Right? So today we are talking about end-of-life matters with courage and clarity, but we're also talking about this as life's final stage. And before I bring our panelists up real quick, let me just reiterate the stages. Those of you who haven't been here since the beginning, in January we talked about life stages. And rather than age, everything we're talking about is not about age, it's about your stage in life. And your stage in life, people die at all different ages, right? And so at the end of life, it might be very old age, it might be 101 or 102 or 120, we don't know, or it could be earlier. But it is the final stage of life. It is the final stage of life. And so it's the only stage of life that we all have in what? Common, other than one, which is what? Birth. Right? Birth. We're all born and we all die. Everything else in between can be different, but those two stages, the starting and the ending stages, are the same. And so we're going to be talking about that today. And we have more than 2 hours and 40 minutes to plan. Good news. For that. And so I'm going to bring up some guest speakers today. Eddie, you and Alec and Kaylee, come on up. And these folks are going to help me talk through some of the issues related to end of life, namely hospice and funeral services and what we do with the disposition of the body after we're gone. And so let's welcome them up. Kaylee with Crossroads Hospice. Alec with Buchanan Funeral Service. And my good friend Eddie, and I don't know what Eddie's title is anymore, because he's not retired, but he doesn't really have a full-time business anymore. And but he comes to the Truth Series a lot, and so I just call him my friend. So today, Eddie's just my friend. How's that? All right, very good. Those of you who don't know Eddie, he has been a funeral director, and I'll let you give you his history. But when I started thinking about who would make a good panelist, I thought, you know what, Eddie's been through pretty much everything that we're going to talk about today on a personal level, and some of it professionally as well. So Eddie, give him a little bit about your history and your background.
Okay. Went to 11 different schools before I ever got out, 6 different colleges, had 10 funeral homes, and retired out of that in 2001, but still have 5 commercial buildings that I operate.
Because he didn't want to retire.
Right. So
I told every one of them to tell you something about themselves that nobody else would know. Is that the 11 colleges thing?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, then I was a close second. I think I've been to about that many too, but I did finish eventually.
I did too.
Okay. Good. All right. And then on a personal note, tell them why you think I asked you up here.
Well, I was a funeral director most of my life, and cared deeply about the people that we served. And I lost my wife about 6 years ago, and I'm fortunate to have my fiance in the audience today. So on the road to recovery. Then with the 2 people that are here, this is just coincidental. I don't know whether you even knew this or not, but I do have pre-arrangements funeral-wise, because several years ago, after we had retired, my wife and I was looking at each other and talking, and we said, one of us are going to go first. And that's brilliant.
Truth, right?
So,
Truth.
Anyway, unless we both get whacked in a car wreck at the same time. But then I said, what kind of excuse are we going to give our children if we haven't made some type of plan for this? Like we didn't know any better? So this is
not a very good excuse in your circumstances.
So just so happened the funeral homes that we dealt with and that we owned were in rural America, and so we're in the big city now. And so we went around and we was looking for a funeral home to make our pre-arrangement plans with, and it just happened to be Buchanan.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Okay, and the other thing is that whenever Kathy was sick and we felt like the medical profession had let us down and we was at all ends, I got out of the funeral business 2001. This is 2018, so 17 years later. Hospice had grown a lot more sophisticated, a lot more capabilities and things that they can do. And so we called, and it just happened to be Crossroads Hospice is who we used. So when she passed away, this is the triangle that was here. We were the client, the patient, the one in need, using Crossroads Hospice with Buchanan Funeral Home coming to pick up the remains. So I do have a close connection.
Yeah, and so I love it because when that happens, serendipitously, I would like that. I love it, first of all, but also it speaks to how small world we live in, right? Too, here in our Oklahoma City area as well. You know, it's funny, I was talking to my niece this week. She's going on her very first interview. She just graduated high school this past year, and as we were interviewing, she kept saying, the city. I'm going to move to the city, and I'm like, you know what, well, we're from small town, this is the city, but when you go elsewhere and you say the city, anybody from elsewhere says, well, which city? I'm like, well, the city, Oklahoma City. I love it, so small town America. All right, ready, Alec?
So my name is Alec Dyer. I'm with Buchanan Funeral Service, and I've been a funeral director for about 9 years. Married into it. My father-in-law owns Buchanan's. My wife ran as far away from it as she could, and she's an interior designer. And she said, nope, I'm not going to be in the funeral business, so then I got to step into that role and kind of take over that. But been working there since 2015, and my one interesting thing, I guess, is I don't know what sleep is anymore. I've got twin boys that are a year and a half old, and they don't sleep and we don't sleep, and we're just proud of coffee and the people that provide it.
Amen, right? I'm glad you're here this morning. Yeah. Matter of fact, when I met you, they were just born, right? Like just brand new, and God love him. he made it through Chris's dad's funeral service unscathed. He did a fantabulous job, even on no sleep. I promise you, he had no sleep. Yeah. And so just so you know, Alec did do Chris's dad's funeral a little over a year ago, and we were very grateful for that. And I think it's always interesting when someone is, I think, kind of brought into a business as part of a family. It can go either way. They can really be really crappy at it because they don't really want to be there and do it, right? But they're feeling like they have to do it. Or they do amazing things. And fortunately, Alec falls on that side of the coin. It was something that, it was an opportunity, but you've done amazing things with it, so thank you for that. Yeah. All right, and Kaylee is a new friend of mine, and so Eddie is the one that introduced me to Kaylee, because I said to Eddie, I said, I need a hospice service who's willing to say things that nobody else is willing to say. I said, I'm tired of hospice services dancing around questions. I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. He said, let me see what I can do. And when I talked to Kaylee the other day, we spoke on the phone for a little over an hour, and I said, you know what, Kaylee, you're in. You're in. You're one of us. So Kaylee, tell them a little bit about you.
My name is Kaylee Brunel. I'm with Crossroads Hospice. I have been with them for about a year and a half. I've previously been in healthcare for about 10 years.
Tell them what in healthcare, what specifically in healthcare?
Yeah, so I was in skilled nursing and rehabilitation before, so on the other side of it, where my purpose was to make people better before they went home from the hospital, and now I'm on the other side of it, getting them home and making them comfortable. So it's been a ride down here in Oklahoma City. And I guess my fun fact about me is I have driven across the country 4 times. So
really?
Coast to coast.
All right, very cool. At this young age, that's impressive. All right. I don't want to have to drive across town, much less the country. All right, so you guys, we have this amazing group of people up here, and we're going to answer some questions. For those of you who are new, I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions. They're going to answer them, and then we're going to open it up to you guys to ask questions. So making notes, you have a handout at your table. It's got a place for you to write notes. And then at the end, you also have an evaluation form to fill out. And if you have questions that you don't feel like you can answer, or ask rather, in public, but you do want to ask them, there's a place on your evaluation you can write those questions down. In which case, we'll pass them on to the appropriate person to give you a call afterwards to answer those, okay? All right, so let's start with the first question. Well, it's actually the second question. You already answered the first question. So the second question is, in your experience, when do most people, those not in the line of work that you're in, tend to begin thinking about issues surrounding end of life, particularly end of life issues? When do you think people most often start talking about them, generally?
When they're forced to.
Yeah, forced to by what?
By some condition beyond their control. And so it's so much better if you can plan ahead and have some sort of control over it. When I first started in the funeral business, I was basically 17, almost 18, and we went out on a call. And there had been a plane crash, and it was a jet out of Beeville, Navy Air Base, and a Piper Cub out of Houston collided in midair.
Oh, wow.
And the pilot out of the small airplane splat right on the ground. The body of the pilot, other than the legs and some shrapnel, landed safely because his seat ejected. So this was just such a quick emergency, you know, there's absolutely no warning. lady committed suicide. And I was thinking, what a shame, you know. And I actually knew her daughter, and I thought if I would have just had a chance to talk to her and tell her, you know, that there was things still left to live for, it would have been great. So people just wait, and today I would beg you, I would implore you, I would admonish you, whatever the case may be that would be appropriate, is now is the time to start making some kind of arrangement that you can have some sort of control over. I'm speaking from a personal level, not a spiritual level. I believe in God that you've made your calling secure. But we still are here in the physical body, so make some kind of arrangements.
So Alec, on your end, as a funeral director, do people tend to, the people that you serve, do they tend to have made plans, or would you say the bigger percentage of people hadn't made plans and they're coming to you kind of in a rush? How does that play out?
I'd say it's about 70% haven't made plans. It's probably pretty normal, and that might be on the low end, but not today was my answer to when do people start talking about end-of-life plans. Not today is the answer. For example, my family that I married into, they have all been around the funeral industry their whole lives. Don't have a clue what they want. Don't talk about it. Refuse to talk about it. My mother-in-law, her parents, they're in their mid-80s. Every year we go to rural America. We go down to Bangor and Onie and Anadarko and go to the different cemeteries, put flowers out, and every year say, do you guys want to come back here and be buried here? I don't know, we haven't talked about it. So not today is kind of the answer, and the plans that people put together, a lot of times they decide where they're going to be buried or if they want to be cremated, and that's about it. So
yeah, that's it. Not today. Yeah, when do you want to talk about this? Not today. Yeah, that's a great answer. Kaylee, from your experience?
I'd say it's about 50-50. So in my experience, what I've seen is when the patient gets a diagnosis, they're calling us, even if they're still seeking treatment, they want questions answered for their family. And then the other half of that is when it's a family member who is the caregiver, who hasn't made any plans, hasn't had that discussion with their loved one. Maybe the loved one isn't able to communicate their desires and needs. But there is a really interesting thing that I've seen in hospice is that when people get like a pre-terminal diagnosis, they are calling for care planning. So I'd say it's about a 50-50 split.
Because we're doing a better job of it. I think, right? As a society and as a medical industry too, they're educating people more on hospice than they used to, for sure. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay, so we know that people don't want to talk about it today. So what is the downside to waiting? There's probably several downsides to waiting. So let's talk about what those are. What would be a couple of downsides? Alec, you want to start with this one?
Sure. So in my experience, regardless of the situation, no matter how long you have to prepare or how long you don't, it seems like a Titanic situation. The ship's going down and there's so many things that you need to process and decide on, and it's just chaos everywhere. And that's what I tell every family I meet with. I can't make this easy for you, but I can make it easier and take some things off your plate. And so that's what this is the what can we take off the plate for that chaotic time down the road, and how can we make it just a little clearer, a little less chaotic, and not quite as feel like I'm jumping off the ship with every decision I make. So.
Right. You know, in real estate, in our downsizing process, we talk about decision fatigue, right? Decision fatigue. So you're having to move, you're moving out of a big house into something smaller, and you look at your walk-in closet and you go, ugh, where do I even start, right? And then you have to decide, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and all these questions, and people get exhausted, right? Now, adding that to the fact that you just lost someone, or it's you yourself that are going through this, and now you add all of the physical, mental, emotional stuff that's going on to that decision fatigue, and you're dealing with people at the epitome of decision fatigue, if they haven't done this at a time, is what you're saying.
And like, for example, my grandma, she got pancreatic cancer, was given a diagnosis of 90 days to live when they found it. She lived for 84, and we spent 82 of those days with her. And so that was just kind of a marathon in and of itself, of trying to be there all the time. And then you still had gone through all the planning. She'd picked out her headstone, she'd kind of done everything, and then you still get to the funeral part, and there's 1,000 more questions.
1,000 more questions.
And so getting to hear some of those questions, not for the first time, whether that be you or your family members, and getting to at least think about them, and maybe you don't have an answer, but you've heard them before, and your family's heard them before. It's just beneficial to not have to be surprised.
Right, yeah. Any downsides to waiting?
When you wait, it takes the control out of your hands, where if you act sooner. In my case, we had our pre-arrangements made funeral-wise, but in hospice care, it would have been easier if we had called hospice sooner. Just for the fact of one is having the knowledge, because there's so many good changes. And by the way, just because you go on hospice, everybody has the fear of, well, you know, it's 6 months and they're going to execute you. That's not the case, okay?
We're going to talk more about that in a minute.
So the quality of life that both the patient and the caregivers will have is better.
But you have to do it sooner to get that.
Yes.
Yeah. Kaylee, any downsides? The main down, I mean, we know there's lots of downsides, but what would you say is the biggest downside to waiting?
So I think the biggest downside to waiting to either talk about hospice or sign on to services is that the patient who requires the care and the family who also needs that additional support, they're going to get that for a more limited time, which means the variety of services that hospice provides, we might not have that time to spend with you. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there about hospice and what we actually do, but the more time you actually get to spend, you know, with your hospice provider on hospice services, you do see an increased quality of life. And there's a whole interdisciplinary support team at that hospice to help you with things like funeral planning, memorial planning, grief support. There's just a wealth of resources that you might not get access to in the time that you need it.
Yeah, so you wait too long and you're in a place where you really can't even take advantage of the things that you can.
Right.
Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about what some of those things are, and we're going to get into some details now, because I want to lay this out, because I think what happens is we do education a lot, and we talk about what things are, and we talk about the nuts and bolts, but we don't talk about we don't compel people a lot of times in education to take action. And if you don't understand the consequences of not taking action, what do we tend to do? We postpone it, right? Well, wear a seatbelt. Okay, great. I'm not going to wear a seatbelt. If you don't know why you're wearing a seatbelt, then you probably won't wear a seatbelt. But in high school, what they learned is that they show kids pictures of people who have been killed in accidents because they weren't wearing a seatbelt. They're more inclined to what? Wear a seatbelt. And so, you know, short of showing you pictures up here, which you can't really do, of people who waited too long, you kind of have to take it for their experience that if they could wave a magic wand, I think all of them would say that's the one thing that you would probably have them do, right? Have people plan earlier, yeah? Is there anything else you would wave your magic wand and have them do?
Well, I'm going to add kind of to that and the other question. A lot of times you get, well, why is this my responsibility? That's for my kids to figure out. And I really liked the title that we put on this today of Navigating End of Life with Courage and Clarity. There's only person that can make this a courage and clarity journey, and it's you. Everybody else is uncertainty and doubt, and it doesn't matter where you leave them at, that is what's going to come along. You are the only one that can provide the clarity in these situations, and then communicating that, I think, is the big one. That would be my magic wand, and I think education partners, no matter what topic we're doing, communicate would be the big one. Let's make that happen and be more effective in how we not only plan, but how we then share with the people that are responsible for us that plan.
What our plans are, for crying out loud, right? Yeah, okay. Right, so let's talk about some of the specifics. Starting with things that are practical. So everyone has a body, right? Look around, see all these things in the room that are moving and breathing and talking and writing things down. These are called bodies. We all have one. A physical presence that after passing must be dealt with. Like you said, spiritually, that's not what this conversation's about. That's a whole different topic. We have a physical body that we have to deal with. And there are laws. There are actually laws about this, right? I even pulled the Oklahoma statutes down in preparation for this, and I thought about bringing them, but they're freaking long. Like long, aren't they? Yeah. And they just keep getting longer. In fact, these laws tell us how we have to handle our bodies after we're gone and how other people can handle them. And so let's start with this. There is a reason that funeral service providers exist, right? There is a reason. Go ahead, Eddie. You want to say? So we have these bodies, and so what is the responsibility of a funeral director? What is their job at the basic level as it deals with bodies? So Alec, I'll start with you, and then Eddie, I'll get you.
So I would say just and kind of hospice or whatever the journey is, your goal is to continue to provide dignity and respect. And so the funeral director has to step in. Legally, they're the only ones that can continue that process, whether it be burial or cremation, embalming or not embalming. We're still going to show up at the house, at the hospital, wherever the death occurs, and take care of that body in a way that provides that dignity and respect. So
And that's not optional, right?
correct.
So I can't just tell the hospital, no, I'll take care of it. We're going to load Dad up in the car, and we're going to take him home, and we're going to put him on the sofa for a little while, and then we'll figure it out. They aren't going to let me do that, are they?
Not an option.
Okay. Eddie, legally, funeral directors, has anything changed since you were doing it back when you were 17, 18 years old?
In some respects, no. But in other respects, some of the laws have refined. The way you file death certificates is a little bit different. Hospice has come along to make the process of death a little easier. Whenever you die, you know, we just don't want to take a bunch of bodies and throw them in the corner somewhere, and that's not a way for a society to treat itself. So that's why we have these laws and these rules and these regulations. So also when a person dies at home or in the hospital, if they die at home and you don't have somebody that will sign the death certificate and it is determined an unexplained death, and Alec can speak on this more. The thing that I didn't want was for her to die and then we have to call and then it's not explained. So you have the sheriff and the police, city police or whatever, and the lights and the ambulance show up, and all the neighbors and things are wondering what's going on. So whenever you can plan ahead and this happens, then it's a very smooth operation.
So what you're saying is if someone dies at home and hospice is not involved, you get the first responders have to come, right? And who else comes, Alec, to the house before you guys can even deal with the body?
Medical examiners contacted, and a lot of times that doesn't necessarily result in them taking the body, but it can become a medical examiner case if there's not a primary care doctor or anything like that. Difference in that is just from a logistics standpoint, any ME case where they're signing off on the death certificate, we tell families 6 months to a year and a half, and we don't know what it's going to be before you actually get a cause of death. Now, what that means for you is if life insurance is going to pay for the funeral, life insurance won't pay until they get a cause of death on a death certificate, and now all of a sudden they're waiting 6 months to a year and a half to get that cause of death from an ME investigation.
So somebody's got to find a way to deal with the costs involved in not just a funeral, but just the disposition of the body, right? Okay, so Kaylee, to you on this, as a hospice provider, what is, if somebody dies at home, legally, does the medical examiner and the fire department have to come, or who comes?
So no, that's actually one of the benefits of being on hospice is you don't have to have the lights and sirens outside your door. Typically, the hospice nurse will come and pronounce with our physician, and then the hospice nurse or chaplain can contact your funeral home of choice and handle it that way. And a lot of times they'll sit and spend time with the families to make sure that they're grieving appropriately. And most hospices, up until the patient passes, have a program where they're going to have a staff member with you if you would like one. So you're not there alone. You don't have to make that phone call. The staff member will already be there, but that's totally your choice.
Sure. Okay, so the difference is then somebody else has to. I remember I heard a story, a friend, and I won't say who because I don't have permission to tell their story. I'll just tell you generally, the friend's parent was in their hundreds and passed away at home. And they were not on hospice, really had no reason to be on hospice because up to that point they were healthy. They passed in their sleep and they didn't have any really illness going on. But the first responders basically asked, do you have a DNR? Do not resuscitate order. Because if they don't have a DNR, then what happens?
Typically the ME is then contacted because there's logistics and legalities that go along with that. But one of the goals of hospice is to make sure that you do have that DNR before that happens to help with that process.
So there are just complications. It's legal stuff, right? I mean, think about this for a second. It used to be where you died in your home, the family just called their local funeral director and it was dealt with, right? But there's legal stuff that people aren't even aware of that has to happen, and you don't want to find that out at 2 a.m. when you've gone in and realized that the person that you love is not breathing. And I think to speak to this is that I love the fact that one of the reasons my Uncle Donnie went on to hospice when he did was we basically said, look, we need it as the family. You may not think you need it or want it. We need you to be on it because here's what we're going to have to go through if you die here. And that's what he wanted, was to die at home. Here's what we're going to have to go through. And we don't want to go through that. Will you please help us not have to go through that? And so he agreed to hospice, not because he wanted it, but because he knew that we asked for it, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the responsibility of the funeral director. Once you have ascertained that the body can be taken to the funeral home, what happens with the body then at that point, Alan?
So then that becomes another good education point of understanding the planning that needs to go into what happens with your body. For example, my mom is a small town, Oklahoma, Church of Christ, traditional. This is how I want everything done, and she does not want a viewing at the church. Once a day of visitation, but not at the church. You want to come see me, come to the funeral home, that kind of thing. There are people that I want to be cremated, stick me in the coffee can, don't say anything else. And we call those people, they're looking for the Houdini service, so just make the body disappear. And so that's an option too. And just deciding what that is for you and what's important for you and your family. And also that part of what's it going to do to my family, the decision that I make for my body. And there are some where you've got family from out of town that hasn't seen you in forever, and it's not going to be real until they see you. You've got some that have been traumatized by the funeral march, by the casket, and don't want any part of that. And understanding the logistics there and just you making the decisions of this is what I want, and this is how I want it to go. Specifically with your body is the thing that we don't think about a lot. We'll go pick out the casket, we'll go pick out the cemetery, but as far as viewing instructions or what to do with ashes, everything like that, we kind of just leave that up to whoever's left. And that can be the biggest point of uncertainty and doubt for the family members that are left behind. Well, I don't know if she wanted to be viewed. Well, I don't know what her hair was supposed to look like in the casket. Well, I don't know what my mom and aunt, they still struggle because the funeral home said, and this is, I get to be blunt up here because I'm an education partner, just forget where I work. And so they still struggle, and really it's the clothing that they put their mom in. Specifically, I can't believe we buried mom in a bra. That is a conversation that they still have. She died 21 years ago, and they're like, my mom hadn't worn a bra in 20 years, and we stuck her one in the casket. So that is another conversation, but just be mindful that that is a part of the planning of what are you going to do with your body.
That will haunt them for life.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Every woman in the room understands what you just said. You know, when we are helping people downsize, they pick what they're going to take usually and move it, and then we deal with what's left at their house. And we had a client who we were assisting, and she had moved, and we're in her dining room one day, and we're kind of going through some of the leftover stuff, and we're segregating it, what's going to go to be sold and what's going to be donated and so on. And there were these two nondescript boxes, small boxes in this dining room. And I'm like, what is in there? And I open up one, I'm like, oh my heavens, it was ashes. It was ashes. And then I opened up the second one, and right before I'm like, I can't open it, that's going to be ashes. Sure enough, it was ashes. We called her and said, what would you like for us to do with these? And she said, well, they were my husband's side of the families, and I don't want them. And I mean, I called the state liquidator, and I'm like, what do we do with these? Like, what do you do with them?
I get 4 or 5 phone calls a year from somebody in your position. Hey, we found a urn or a box of ashes. They've got your name on it. What do we do? And so that's always a conversation. But if you didn't know what you wanted to do with your mother-in-law, neither do your kids. So make that decision for them.
These are tough decisions, right? I mean, and we can laugh about it, but these are tough decisions. And the fact of the matter is, there are some laws around what you can do with ashes. What can you not do with ashes, Alan?
Depends on what you ask permission to do.
So my rule of thumb is better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Now, obviously, unless you think you're going to damage something or hurt the environment, but I don't think anybody's going to say anything to you if you were to go out to a pasture and put those ashes out in the pasture. That may be a different thing if you're putting them in Lake Hefner, which happens to be our water source. So just think about what you're doing with those when you do what you do with them. Right? Okay, let's keep going. Kaylee, what has been your experience in regard to the folks that are in hospice? Do you find that they generally have a plan, or do your hospice providers, the social workers and the chaplains and the nurses, help facilitate that? How do you see that?
Yeah, so some people know exactly what they want, down to the outfit that they want to wear, hairstyle. They've got it all planned out. Their kids know exactly what they want to do. In fact, their preferred hospice provider has been written into their advance directive. They've got a book.
There are a lot of people in this room like that.
Yeah, and that's great. You should be prepared. You make a lot of important decisions. Where are you going to go to school? Who are you going to marry? Where are you going to live? Why not make those decisions about your final moments and what happens to you after you pass? Because we want to honor that. And you don't want to leave your family scrambling. But if you're like me, I am happy just to make it to the next day. I'm not necessarily thinking about what's going to happen, 30, 40 years down the road. So we do have those people who this is a total shock. They weren't planning for it, whether it's a person who's younger who's gotten a terminal diagnosis, or somebody who just, that's not something that they ever openly talked about. So our part of the core hospice services is that our social workers and our chaplains complete an assessment with you and your family when you come on to services, and they ask you what your plans are. And if you don't have a plan, that's totally okay. That's what we're here for. We're gonna go through a checklist with you. We're gonna ask you about your wants, your wishes.
Not necessarily that day.
No, yeah.
Right? There's a process for that.
Right, so typically, that first week that a patient comes on to services, they're seen by each of the disciplines. So your nurse, your home health aide, your social worker, your chaplain, and they're reaching out to do introductory services, and then that's when that planning starts. And if you don't know, we have lots and lots of resources, and we really try to get to know you and make sure that everything is lined up for you, so when that time does come, it's a smooth transition for your family.
So hospice can help facilitate a lot of those things if people are
Absolutely.
having time. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the stress already. So that was a question I was going to ask you, but you've kind of talked about the stress that it puts on families if you don't have a plan. How is the handling of the body different when a person dies at home versus wherever home might be for them? Like a home could be their house, it could be an independent living community, an assisted living community, a nursing community, versus on hospice versus not on hospice. We kind of talked about the funeral director service, but is there a difference in, I guess where I'm going with this is, for instance, let's say somebody says, I want to die at home, but they have a medical emergency. They panic, the family panics, they're on hospice. Do they go to the ER or do they not go to the ER? What are the steps for that?
So with hospice, there is no regulation that says that you can't go to the ER. So you can be on services, you can have a DNR, and if you or your family decides like, nope, I'm going to the emergency room, it is fully within your right to do so. And then depending on what happens during that visit, you may have to come off of services per Medicare guidelines, federal regulations. If you're seeking treatment, that's not in line with hospice goals and philosophy, so we can't continue to use, your insurance benefit, which is why you would have to come off. And then we do have some people who go and they can't go back home. So they have what's called a general inpatient level of care, where hospice can come into the hospital. So you'll be in a hospital room, but your hospice provider will be your primary caregiver there.
Even in the hospital?
Absolutely, yeah. So we work with the physician attending at the hospital to make sure your plan of care is appropriate for that level, because there are some people who are too fragile to return home, but they still need that hospice level of care.
This might be a good time, it's a little out of order, Kaylee, so I apologize, but this might be a good time to talk about how hospice is paid for. So if I'm somebody that has received a diagnosis that it's imminent, that my death is going to be coming, how is that paid for, and how does someone go on hospice services?
So typically, hospice is paid through a Medicare benefit. It's part of your Part A Medicare benefit, and it is covered at 100%. So it pays for your medications, the care that you receive, equipment. There are some things that Medicare won't cover, but your hospice provider will go through that list with you and make sure that, if there is anything outside of that you and the family are aware of that. There are some private insurances, say if you're not Medicare aged or don't have access to that benefit, that will cover hospice. Sometimes there's a copay associated with that. And now I believe, and I don't have all the details on it, Sooner Care did roll out a hospice benefit. So patients who aren't Medicare aged but do meet requirements for the state Medicaid can receive hospice services.
They may be a little more limited than what Medicare pays for, you think?
So you'll still receive the same services. It's just about which providers are able to actually bill that. So,
all right, gotcha. Thank you. We'll come and we can answer questions in more detail about that. I just want to make sure that we talk about it here. Okay, so Alec, I want to talk about. I want to stay on the line of kind of after someone passes. What are you seeing in terms of some of the current trends around memorial services, and what are some of the pros and cons around those trends that you're seeing?
I think that's something that we've discussed at some of these seminars is the difference in how long people are living, and specifically that gap in your, what do we call it?
Health
lifespan.
span.
Yeah, health span versus lifespan, and how dramatic that difference can be, because we're getting to a point where that health span may have ended a long time ago, and the lifespan has continued for another 15, 20 years. And now all of a sudden the dynamics in the family have changed a lot. The burden of being a caregiver has changed a lot. Go hospice. But the value that people have placed on different services has changed also. A lot of times they are ready for something a little more simple. If you know this has been dragged out enough already, then let's make this short and sweet and do something different as opposed to the big elaborate services that we've had in the past. And then there's some that, we're going further and further away from churches. There's not a meal to get together. There's not a place for the family to go that holds all 45, 50 of the distant family that only sees each other at funerals. And so then that's a little bit of a logistic thing. But it's also bringing in some new twist of, it doesn't look like a funeral. Maybe it looks like a reception. Maybe it's just people sitting around and sharing stories and nothing else. No preacher, no prayers, anything like that. So a lot of different changes, a lot of different perspectives for why those changes are coming, but it's all interesting.
Yeah, so it's kind of the Wild Wild West in a way, right? Everything's being reinvented.
Yep.
Right? These baby boomers, they're a real pain, I tell you. Right? They've been changing things since they were born, right? Okay, so Eddie, from your perspective, you started out in the funeral business when you were really young, and you've seen it evolve. What are some of the trends you're seeing now? And in your stage of life, how did you and Kathy reconcile some of the things that you made decisions about?
Well, I am considerably older than the younger generation that's up here sitting by me, and I will say I'm so grateful for them. Let's give them a hand. In the funeral land is, I still go to funerals. Okay, now then there's some people that have memorial services, gatherings, and Linda went to some relatives, folks that had a nice deal in the house. And the family all came in and they had several hours to discuss memories and things. The thing that I am adamantly supportive of is that you consider the people that love you. And that I use a little story about a kid on a bicycle that falls off and hurts their arm. In this case, I'm going to use one about a spot on your nose. So what you do is I went and got this cut off. I put a bandage on it. I took and put medicine on it. I hope that it heals up sooner. That's the reason that you have some type of a service, is so that you love people. It hurts. It's a wound. Take care of it.
Yeah, I've never heard it described that way, but that makes sense. Yeah, there's grieving that goes on. Pros and cons, Alec, that you see a family struggling with this decision.
Well, I've got two personal stories that I'll share that kind of highlight it. But one, we had she was my great aunt, and her husband had died very early on, 40, 50 years ago, of a heart attack. And so she'd kind of been on her own for a long time. And when she was on her own, eventually she started moving in with the kids and kind of bounced around to the different kids' homes and ended up at my aunt's house for a while. And then right at the end, she ended up in a assisted living. And she got the Houdini package of direct cremation and nothing else, and no service, anything else. And we had a cousin that called me and said, you know, I have planned a direct cremation. I wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want the cost to impact my family. No way. I'm not going to do it. It feels like she just disappeared off the face of the earth, and there's no event. There's no service. Going a little bit further, last year I lost my grandpa week before Thanksgiving, and I got to be a part of that service, and I got to give up and speak at that service as well. And one of the things I did was I wrote a letter to my boys who knew him but didn't really get to know him very well, of who he was to me. And what I noticed that week was all of a sudden I knew who he was to my grandma. They've been married for 70-something years, and the week of the funeral, we're staying up late, we're drinking coffee, she doesn't sleep either, and we're writing an obituary, we're looking at old pictures, and I'm hearing all the old stories, and all of a sudden I get a more complete picture of who he was, as opposed to if we don't do anything, we don't do any service, we don't prepare for that, then you've got to just hope that the family still comes together and talks, and that doesn't always happen. So.
Yeah, similarly, I had two experiences as of late. My uncle and a cousin who I was close to that lived in Florida who died during the pandemic, and they chose not to do memorial services in both cases. And I will tell you, there's a lack of closure. There's a lack of closure. I frequently find myself thinking, I don't feel like I have closure with those two individuals in my life. And I think that's the real thing that services bring, is not just mourning and grieving opportunity, which I think it does, but also brings closure, right? It's some sense of letting go, right? Being able to let go. Now, there are reasons, obviously, not to do services, and I understand that too, but I think that that's a consideration. I wrote in my end-of-life plan, just to share a little transparency, I had to do mine back in 1997. I had to start it as part of my degree program in gerontology at SMU. And when you're 27 years old and you're writing your end-of-life plan, that seems a little odd. But now I'm looking back at it, I'm so grateful because I've added to it and I've changed it and I've modified it over the years. But one of the things that I put in it this last time was that I don't necessarily need you, my family, to have a funeral or memorial service after my death. But if you choose to do so, here's what I want it to be. Because you know me, I'm a control freak, right? This is my room, I want it the way I want it. So if you're gonna have a funeral service, by golly, this is the way I want you to do it. Here are the songs I would want, here's what I want you to say, these are the things I would want to happen, and then anything else you want to do, feel free. But these are the bare minimum things. And I thought, okay, at least I'm giving some direction as to what I would want them to do so that they can follow that. But I also don't want it to be so strict that they feel like they can't do what they need to do to get closure, if that makes sense. So I'm giving them an out. Don't have one, totally fine. You don't have to feel guilty about that. Two, if you do feel the need to have one, here's some structure. Here's some things that I would want. And I'm also giving them the freedom by saying, and do what you feel like you need to do. Right? So I kind of feel like I covered the bases. And my intention behind that was what you said was that this is really about them, not me. I'll be gone. Right? The Houdini thing works for me. But it may not work for everybody. Okay, so let's talk about money, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. Is there a financial component here for those who are money conscious? Anybody in the room money conscious? Okay, we got a few people. So, do people tend to spend more or less on a burial or cremation if they planned versus pre-planned, or if they didn't plan versus pre-planning? Where do they spend more money? When? Alec, go ahead.
So, planning is always a little less emotional. I feel so bad I didn't get to see Mom last week and she passed away. Now I'm going to spend $500 on flowers. that doesn't happen if mom said we're spending $300 on flowers and this is what I want. So there's a little bit of restraint there that comes with removing yourself from the emotions. There is also the benefit of kind of the clear head of knowing, you know, you've looked at this, you've picked out what you want, you've had the conversations, and you know how you're going to fund it. Whether that be life insurance, or it's sitting in a savings account, or you've done a pre-arrangement. If you're looking at caskets and you've got a life insurance policy that's supposed to cover paying off a car and this and whatever else, and all of a sudden if you jump up, it doesn't do one of those things. If you pick a mahogany casket instead of a lower end casket, it doesn't do one of those things, then you get to make that decision now, as opposed to your family saying, well, I know she wanted the mahogany casket, and then in 3 months they figure out, well, now we don't have money for this bill. So that's kind of the most that I see.
Yeah, because the emotions, people will make bad decisions and spend more money out of guilt or obligation or some sense of responsibility. Your experience with that the same, Eddie?
Yes, very much so. That's human nature, and it hasn't changed over the course of time.
No, it doesn't change. My grandpa, I spent, I think I told this story last time, somewhere around like $30,000 on a casket and whatnot when my mom passed away because of their grief process. He felt like he honored her by spending more. And I can tell you right now that what he probably spent on a casket, he could pay for my college education. I mean, right? I mean, so you look at that when someone is hurting and they're making a decision, they're not thinking about anything else. They're just thinking about how do I try to appease my sense of hurt in this moment. And so it can be very costly. So I encourage people to pre-plan, but also even prepay. When Chris's dad passed, I loved it because Alec did, this is what I love about Alec, is Chris's dad had pre-planned, they had a budget, and we had, and Alec had it, and he'd say, okay, here's what we've got. This is kind of what's in the package, and you could substitute this for this, and this, and this, and this. And at one point, he looked at me and he said, Nikki, he goes, okay, so we have this in the budget, and it's already paid for, so if you want to use it, we can use it for this. And he said that we could put flowers on the tables in the reception area where we were doing after the service. And I said, it's already in the budget? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I don't even know what we would put there. And he goes, well, I have some ideas. You want me to share them? And I said, yeah. And he showed me some pictures, and they were popcorn containers because Chris's dad was a theater manager for many years. And they had white carnations in them. So it looked like popcorn. And he goes, I can arrange that for you, and it's in the budget. And I'm like, done, sold, right? He handled it all. But because it was in the budget, it wasn't a hard decision, right? Otherwise, it would have been a really hard decision. Do we, don't we, that kind of thing. There wasn't any question. And the family he tracked with us all the way through. This is in the budget, this would be a little extra, how do you want to handle that? Okay, so we're gonna open it up, guys, but before we do, I want to have Kaylee answer one question that I haven't asked, because I want you to define, Kaylee, the difference between palliative care and hospice real quick.
Sure. So they are similar. Palliative care is for patients who have a pre-terminal diagnosis. So, for example, say you have a cancer diagnosis, you're still actively seeking treatment for it, but you want an extra level of care that's, purely for symptom management. So a palliative care provider, either through a hospice and palliative care company or through a hospital system like Integris, or even your insurance company sometimes has independent like nurse practitioners. What they're going to do is they're going to work with you, they're going to work with your specialists, they're going to see you regularly to help manage your symptoms as you're pursuing treatment for your illness. And you can be on that up to 3 years. That's also covered through your Medicare benefit. It's treated like a doctor's visit. And it really helps bridge the gap between when you're looking for treatment and when you're preparing for the next stage, which is hospice. So with hospice, it's for patients who have decided either they don't want to do treatment anymore, treatment isn't effective anymore, they want to do more comfort-based measures. So for instance, I have worked with patients who, they really just want to hang out at home with their dog and, watch movies, have a couple beers, and you know what? On hospice, that's what we do. Like, absolutely. We're not going to tell you no. Our goal is to make sure that you're comfortable, your honors are, your wishes are honored, and so you will need a diagnosis with a prognosis of 6 months or less. But like Eddie said earlier, if you meet that 6 months and you're still requiring care, hospice will still be there for you.
There's no execution.
Right. There's no execution. And we've had patients who have come on to service and they've gotten really close and then they've gotten better and have graduated off hospice. So it's definitely not the end of the road. It's just the next level of care for where you're at in your disease progress or with what you want. So.
Okay, so a lot of people don't know to ask for palliative care. They don't even know to ask for it, and doctors don't often encourage it, right? Okay. All right, so because of time, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. Is there anything you guys want to add to tie up any loose ends from this conversation before I move on? No? Yeah, Kim?
I think, and I didn't get to say this earlier, but I want everybody to know that even if your provider isn't talking to you about hospice, or maybe you're asking for it and they don't know which direction to point you in, anybody can make a referral to hospice. Whether you have that diagnosis or not, you can call, and I definitely recommend calling and talking to different hospice providers just to get your questions answered. We are in this to build a community around the people who need it most. So there's really no sales pitch. We just want to get your questions answered so you can make the best decisions for you and your family. And all it is a phone call. Even if you don't have a primary care physician, the medical director at the hospice will take care of that for you. So there's no barrier for entry for the care that you deserve to receive.
Well, and she's being very kind, and I appreciate that. I will tell you, I get a little frustrated because the medical field, the doctors don't recommend hospice in many cases when they should. When my uncle was told that his cancer was no longer treatable and that he had an infection, in fact, that was going to be what killed him, not the cancer, but they couldn't treat the infection anymore, it was beyond treatment, and they basically said that's all we can do. And I said, well, could you recommend hospice, a hospice consult? And the doctor said, well, we can look into that. I'm like, no, I'm confused. No, we're going to have a hospice consult, is what I'm saying to you. So basically, I had to have a nurse handle it. Doctors don't want to quit. Doctors don't like to quit, and doctors don't necessarily, I firmly believe, especially cancer doctors, I hate to say this, but God love them, they will try treatments just to be trying treatments, just to be trying treatments, just to be trying treatments, even when they'll tell you, I don't think this treatment's going to work, but we can do it anyway. Instead of saying, let me have you talk with someone from palliative care and hospice, and you can then weigh your options. So you sometimes as a family member, you have to advocate, or you have to advocate for yourself to say, I want to at least have a consult with hospice to find out what that looks like, or palliative care. Okay, so let's open it up for questions. I'll take your questions and then pass them on to the panelists. And if we could keep them to questions and not commentaries, because if you're talking and you're in the room, the rest of the people can't hear you. So, I saw a couple of hands go up, so I'm going to get the one way in the back so I don't miss you, and then I'll come up here.
So could you talk about donating our body to science? Do they call 911, or do they ever send the body back?
If they're donating it to science? Okay, great question. So her question is, how would one donate their body to science? And do they call 911 to do that, or how does that work? And do they ever send the body back? I don't know if you guys can answer that or not, but let's shoot. Let's see. Go, Alec?
Pre-plan. There are a lot of different body donation programs in Oklahoma. Most of those you can fill out that you are interested ahead of time and kind of let them know, put them on your radar. But that is something that they would then give you a contact number. If something occurs, this is who you call first. It's not 911, and most of the time what they do there is they will kind of jump through all the hoops with whoever is attending that death of, is this person still qualified to make a body donation? And they will either accept or reject based on the information that they get, and then can kind of move forward in that process. But alerting people to that, one, communicating to your loved ones that that's a possibility for you, and two, finding those programs and filling out their forms ahead of time makes everything go a lot smoother.
Yeah, and it's my understanding, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but generally speaking, if you're donating organs versus your body to science, so if you're donating organs, that's generally got to be done like that's got to be made before you are pronounced dead. Yes, typically. That would be more of a life share question, not a past death question.
And there's organs that are very time conscious, there's body that's very specific criteria, and then there's tissue donation that is almost anybody can give anything. And that's all the way from corneas to skin to long bones out of your leg. And all of those questions will be asked. Hospitals in Oklahoma are required, if there is a donor that would qualify, to alert life share, which means they will then call your family and say, are you willing to donate? And they will ask them that question, are you willing to donate tissues? Are you willing to donate organs? Are you willing to donate corneas? And so on and so forth. So kind of exploring that and giving your family an answer there is important too.
You know, it's interesting, we just, this week, I met with my nieces, now 18 and 19 years old, and we did their advanced directive. And basically I felt like I needed to have something in writing if something would happen to one of them, that somebody would have permission to deal with them should they be incapacitated at 18 and 19. And so we did that, and it asks the questions. The state form asks the questions on body donation or on life share. Those questions, one of my nieces actually said, well, how do you donate tissue? And I'm like, I don't know, we need to Google that. Right, so this is an education process in and of itself. Like, you don't just make these decisions. And she said the cornea. We're looking at these questions, and you have to really actually do a little research to figure out, are these things you would actually want to do. So thank you for that question. Yes, sir.
Well, after listening to some of the responses, what if the patient doesn't want hospice, but the family feels they need it?
Great question, thank you. So, Kaylee, what if the family, the caregivers, feel like they need hospice, and hospice comes in, does a consult, and the patient doesn't want to sign on to hospice?
That's a great question, and that happens a lot. So typically what will happen is the nurse will come out, consult with the patient and the family, and as long as the patient is still decisional and able to make those independent decisions, we can't put that patient on unless the patient agrees. So what will happen is a lot of times a liaison like myself will continue to follow up with the family and the patient and just have that conversation. Typically we'll reach out to the providers as well and say, hey, we went out and talked with the family. Family's on board, they feel like they need that support. Patient's not quite there yet, because it is a very emotionally loaded decision to decide to do something like stop treatment. So it's not always going to be wrapped up in one visit. And for example, I followed a family and checked in with them over the course of half a year. And the patient had, finally come to that decision because their quality of life had declined so much that they were really interested in receiving more comfort measures. They had continued to have that conversation with their family. I had continued to check in with them periodically. So it's never, you say no and, that's where it ends. Eventually you are going to need those services, and hopefully, that day that I make that phone call or you call me, we're able to do that. So.
Don't you think, Kaylee, that a lot of times it's misconceptions people have, the patient may have, like they think, oh, I only have 6 months, so if I wait a few more months to get on hospice, maybe I'll have more time, right? It's not rational, but people's brain does funny things when they start talking about timelines.
Yeah, absolutely. And and there's no, we don't have a crystal ball. You could get a prognosis of 6 months and you could live much longer than that, but you can still receive benefits from hospice, as you're going through that. And studies have shown, the sooner you do get onto hospice services, we see the average life expectancy grow by about a month, just based upon the quality of care that patient receives. So.
Thank you for that. Yes, Betty?
Okay, you've addressed a lot of questions on hospice, but how soon should I call hospice if I'm a caregiver? I kind of sit.
How soon should they call hospice if they're a caregiver?
Yeah, so hospices are all about building a community. So you can call at any time and get those questions answered. We can come out and visit, and there is a set of clinical criteria that the patient does have to meet, but there is absolutely no barrier for having somebody come out and talk to you. In fact, we encourage it, which is part of the reason why I'm up here today, because it should be part of your advanced care planning. So you should interview with lots of hospices, because we get, we all get paid the same amount of dollars from Medicare, but each company is a little bit different. So you want to find the company that has those kind of extra programs that you feel is going to fit you best and what you value best.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah. Yes?
Comment. Many long years ago, I was a good friend and went around to the families and there and everything like that. 2 or 3 weeks later. And she said the family pet was still running through the house when it was Dr. Adams. And they take the animal, the cat, and let the animal see its habits or the dog will accept that. Otherwise, we still go through the house when it's quiet.
So I know you guys couldn't hear that, but he's speaking to the issue of pets, that when someone passes, do you have a program for how you handle pets, or do you want me to just repeat what Mr. Ross said?
So we don't have like a specific program for how we handle pets, but that is some pretty common knowledge. We had a patient who passed, and her cat just kind of sat at the end of the bed the whole time while we were talking with the family and doing those preparations. And we have heard that letting the animal or the pet kind of see that. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
Yeah.
We've had lots of dogs that come to visit the funeral home and come to visit the casket. We've even had one family that called and said, they're pretty close to dying, our loved one. The dog's pretty close too. Should we put the dog down now or wait until later to bury with the casket? I said, just don't bring me a live dog that you want in the casket.
Isn't it interesting that we can do that with animals, right? It's getting close to time. Can we just take care of that? Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
A question about something you started almost like 2 years, number 2 question. And that was, I was a little confused about the body, if you die about were you saying that if you pre-plan with a funeral home, that the funeral home can come and then you don't have a problem with the medical?
Okay, so there's a little bit of confusion, so let's clarify. So the question is, if you've pre-planned your funeral, does that mean that you can call the funeral home directly if you pass at home and circumvent the medical examiner need?
No, you cannot. So the trigger word is unattended versus attended death, and whether there is direct medical supervision or not. And that kind of decides the logistics of what happens immediately after death. And so hospice is obviously a direct medical supervision in a
Hospital
facility, something like that. You're receiving that. Certain cases where there's been some health issues and a primary care doctor can kind of attest to that and has seen you frequently recently, then they can provide that, but anything besides that would be unattended and would fall into the first responder and medical examiner.
So anything that doesn't fall under those things you just mentioned
Well, no, so the 6 months to a year waiting for determination of cause of death was kind of a specific circumstance, right, Alex?
And that's an ME investigation, and so that's more if they start doing an autopsy, start doing things like that. Most cases, depending on age, different things like that, they're not going to go all the way there, but it really depends on what circumstances are around the death.
If it's uncertain, they don't know why, and there's no real obvious reason, they might have to investigate.
Correct.
In which case you would have to wait. Yeah, Tommy. I'm sorry, hang on real quick, let's finish that up. So if someone dies at home and they don't have any clue, like what they walk in, they don't know if you've pre-planned, they don't know if they're on hospice, any of that, they walk in, you're passed, who do they call?
So, first off, if you've got a hospice relationship or a funeral director relationship, feel free to call them first and let them kind of walk you through what you need to do. And then 911 is always an option, but 911, once you hit that button, you can't undo it. So if you've got any advocates that you are comfortable with having that conversation, that, hey, I just found mom and this is what's going on, let them walk you through that with their expertise. If you don't, then 911 is always your best bet.
Yeah. Hang on, I'm going to get Tommy's question and then I'll come back. Yeah, Tommy.
Do you feel that physician-assisted suicides will be approved in Oklahoma?
Do we feel like physician-assisted suicides will ever be approved in Oklahoma?
So we don't know. There's 10 states, maybe 11 right now in the US where that is an option, and you have to have a terminal illness that has a prognosis of 6 months or less, and there's other screenings that you have to go through in order to have that arranged. And so there are advocacy groups that are advocating for that right. But right now, there's no clear answer.
So, Kaylee, if someone's under hospice care and they're terminal, and whatever, let's say it's cancer, and they're at the end, they know they're at the end, and they're tired, and their family's tired, can hospice help hasten that death? Can they help us move over to the other side?
So I'm glad you brought that up. That's actually one of the misconceptions about hospice and the comfort medications that hospice uses. So hospice doesn't hasten or delay the dying process. That's not something that we do. Our goal is to make that transition as smooth as possible, keep that patient as comfortable as possible, and prep that family and help with that grieving
Now,
process.
you mentioned to me, I think, on the phone that day that sometimes the pain medication, like morphine, can make that person comfortable enough that they actually do then go ahead and pass on. It doesn't necessarily kill them, but it allows their body to relax, I think is maybe the way you put it.
Yeah, so we can talk a little bit about that. Morphine is, I think, the most common medication that gets brought up and having conversations about that. So let's talk about what happens when the dying process begins. So we have a saying in hospice that everybody dies of a broken heart, because typically that is your last, vital organ to go. But the first is a cellular death, so the smallest thing in your body. So one cell dies, and that's not too painful, but then more and more cells die, and they start to clump together, and then that's where you get that really deep, uncomfortable pain. And so what morphine does is it helps with the contractibility of your heart. So it allows for your heart to work better, more strong. So it's delivering oxygen to those cells to ease that transition. So they're dying slower, which makes that transition go a little bit more smoother for you.
Not as painful.
Right. And you can be on those medications for a while. Some people, we don't really know whether it's, the medication process, the disease progress. Some people hang on waiting for, permission from their family, even if they're totally unconscious and non-responsive. Sometimes we've seen that they're waiting for a loved one from out of state to come and kind of say it's okay.
Yeah. And so lots of things about that very last, and so here's what I would say about that to the room is that if you have never been at someone's bedside who has passed, in the way that we're talking about. Hospice can educate you to know what is normal and what is not normal. And that's the real key. Is this a normal thing? Should I be worried about this? And the hospice providers can say, no, this is very normal, or this is not normal, we need to deal with this, right? And so that's what I appreciate about that. Okay, I think I'm down to the last question, then we're gonna have to go, so I'm gonna take yours, and then we'll move on. Yep.
In case of cremation, if the family wants a viewing, what does that look like?
In case of a cremation, they've chosen cremation, but the family wants a viewing, how do they handle that?
Any way you want, really. So there are options for a private family viewing, which then does not require embalming, and they can see you. There's not a lot of options as far as makeup and different things like that. It would be more just getting you in a position where it'd be very similar to hospice, passing in a bed. That's kind of how they would see you. And then you can always go the far extreme and do everything like you would for a traditional funeral, and have a viewing, have a casket, have a day of visitation, and then at the end you just do the cremation instead of go to the cemetery. So anywhere in those extremes, there's finding what's right for your family, but all the options are there.
So in the case of the casket, is there a rented casket? Okay.
Correct. So rental casket, so for example, ours is $900 as opposed to most caskets start around $1,800. So about half the cost.
So you rent the casket for the viewing, yeah. So guys, I know there are tons of questions, all valuable. These guys are gonna be over at this table towards the back here. Kaylee will be back here. Eddie, you gonna hang out back there for a little bit? And then Alec, where's your table? In the corner. And so grab these guys afterwards. They all have materials over there they can visit with you about. And here's what I would say. Here's your call to action, and it's on your handout today. On your handout on the back side, there are 5 action steps. If you do nothing else after today, take that handout, turn it over, look at those 5 action steps, and take action on at least one of them. You don't take action on all 5 of them, but take action on at least one of them, because that will help then get us moving forward toward doing things to make life and death a little bit easier. Can we give these guys a round of applause? Thank you very much. As always, we learned a lot. And Eddie, there we go, perfect. And these guys will be back in the back. I've got a couple of quick announcements to make before we adjourn. And mainly just some other education that's coming up. Alec and his team at Buchanan are doing a couple of complimentary things for our group. And one of them is, there's a lot of people that have done some pre-planning. Maybe you did it in another state, maybe you did it a long time ago. But similarly, like when we have Jennifer at Wright Law Firm review your estate plan, just to kind of see, does everything look in order, that kind of thing. Well, Alec at Buchanan is willing to do that as well with your funeral plan. No matter where you created it, it doesn't matter, complimentary. He can take a look at that about 30 minutes or so, just kind of review it and see if there are any gaps that you need to fill in, if there's any changes or things that you may want to consider. It's not a sales pitch, it's just his way of saying, let's make sure, if you think you have your ducks in a row, let's make sure they are. And then of course, if you don't have a plan and you want to do that, that's a different conversation. They're doing a workshop on the 25th at their facility over on Council. It's a beautiful location if you've never been there. And this is more of a small group. You can get together with a few other people, and he's going to talk about the pre-planning process and what that looks like. It will include pricing and things like that. So if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, again, this is an educational opportunity. And then if you choose to pre-plan with them, you can. There's no sales pitch. We're all about educating, okay? And then Shannon and their team and Jake and their team at OKC Mature Moves and Bucklew Realty Group, they're going to do something totally not related to death and dying. And they're going to talk about open houses. So if you want to know how to look at open houses or how to have an open house and want to know more about that, they're going to be doing that. And then Concordia has a couple of spots, as I understand it, left on their road trip to Elk City. So it's Wednesday the 26th. So if you want to do that, get with Concordia. There's a cost involved in that, but they'd love to have you go. And I don't have a slide for it, but Senior Life Skills Learning also has an event coming up on the brain. And Chris Coleman, who's the wellness director at Concordia, is going to be speaking at that event. You can check the box on that on the education opportunities on the sheet we have at the table. All the details are on the table on that sheet. You can contact us or Villages for that event. Last but not least, next month, back here, same place, same time, estate planning truths for every stage. We're going to be talking about estate planning, but we're going to do it differently next month in that they're going to talk about estate planning, but not just retirement estate planning. Like I just mentioned, I have nieces 18 and 19 years old. They need to be doing some things too, right? 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, parents, your kids that have kids, do they have their documents in place? And so they're going to be talking a little bit about different stages of life, the things that people need. So if you have someone in your life that you think might want to hear that talk, bring them next month on Thursday, July 11th. Did y'all learn something today? All right, give yourselves a meeting.